The boarding gate hummed with the usual chaos of departing passengers, but Maya Robinson barely noticed. She walked beside her mother, Diana, through the jet bridge with her worn backpack pressing against her spine. At 15, she had learned to carry herself with quiet dignity, even when the world seemed determined to make her feel small. Today would test that resolve in ways she never imagined. The first-class cabin smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Maya's eyes swept across the plush seats, each one a small throne of comfort. Diana had saved for months to afford these tickets, a birthday surprise meant to celebrate Maya's academic achievements. The girl had earned scholarships, won essay contests, and maintained perfect grades while juggling part-time work at the community center. This flight was supposed to be a reward, a taste of the luxury their hard work might someday provide permanently. But celebration turned to confrontation the moment they reached row 3. A boy, perhaps 17, sprawled across the aisle with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. His designer jacket hung open, revealing a brand-name shirt that probably cost more than Diana's monthly grocery budget. Blonde hair fell across his forehead in carefully styled waves, and his blue eyes held the cold amusement of someone about to enjoy a private joke at someone else's expense. His legs stretched wide, one foot propped deliberately on the armrest of Maya's assigned seat, the other blocking the narrow passage. Diana cleared her throat softly. "Excuse us, please. We need to get to our seats." The boy didn't move. Instead, his lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. He looked Maya up and down, his gaze lingering with obvious disdain on her faded jeans and second-hand sneakers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried just enough volume to ensure others could hear. "This section's for people who belong here," he said, each word dripping with mockery. "But hey, I'll make you a deal. If your daughter can say hello in Chinese, maybe I'll move. Think she can manage that?" The cabin temperature seemed to drop. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by their phones, magazines, anything that meant avoiding eye contact. An elderly couple 2 rows back exchanged glances, but said nothing. A businessman in a pressed suit adjusted his tie and stared determinedly at his laptop screen. The flight attendants were still helping passengers in economy, unaware of the confrontation unfolding in first class. Maya felt her mother's hand tighten on the suitcase handle. Diana's jaw clenched, her whole body radiating a tension that Maya recognized. It was the same posture her mother adopted whenever they faced security guards who followed them through stores, or teachers who expressed surprise at Maya's test scores, or neighbors who questioned whether they really lived in their modest apartment. The exhaustion of constantly proving their right to exist in spaces others took for granted. But beneath that familiar tension, Maya felt something else rising within herself. Not anger, though she had every right to it, not shame, though the boy clearly expected it. Instead, a fierce clarity settled over her like armor. She thought of Mrs. Chen, who had fled persecution and now cleaned offices by night while teaching Maya Mandarin phrases during lunch breaks. Of Mr. Okonkwo, once a university professor, now driving a taxi but always willing to share stories in his native Igbo. Of Senora Martinez, the widow who taught Spanish to neighborhood kids for free in her tiny apartment. Maya's education hadn't come from expensive tutors or private schools. It had come from immigrants and refugees, from people the world had tried to make invisible, just as this boy was trying to make her invisible now. Their voices echoed in her memory, every lesson a gift born from struggle and survival. She let her backpack slide from her shoulder, catching it with one hand, the other hand clenched into a fist, nails digging crescents into her palm. When she looked at the boy, her gaze was steady and unwavering. "You want me to greet you in Chinese?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. His smirk widened. "Go ahead. Prove you're not just taking up space you didn't earn." Around them, The cabin fell into a silence so complete that the distant hum of the engines seemed deafening by contrast. The businessman's fingers froze above his keyboard. The woman with the pearl necklace stopped mid-adjustment, hand suspended near her throat. Even the boy's own smugness faltered slightly, as if some instinct warned him he had miscalculated. Maya took a breath, feeling her mother's presence beside her like an anchor. "I'll do better than that," she said. "I'll greet you in 10 languages, and when I'm done, you'll move." The boy laughed, but it sounded forced. "Right, sure you will. Watch me." The first word emerged in Mandarin, clear and precise, each tone perfect. "Ni hao." The characters danced through her mind, lessons learned over shared lunches and whispered conversations. She didn't pause, didn't give him time to process or respond. French flowed next, smooth as silk, the greeting rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "Bonjour." Senora Martinez had insisted she learn multiple Romance languages, teaching her the connections between Spanish, French, and Italian. "Hola." Spanish crisp and confident, carrying the warmth of afternoon lessons in cramped kitchens, the scent of arroz con pollo mixing with conjugation drills. "Ciao." Italian came with memories of Mr. Rossini, the baker who had taught her between kneading dough and pulling bread from ovens that smelled like heaven. The cabin erupted in gasps. Passengers who had been studiously avoiding the confrontation now turned fully in their seats, phones emerging from pockets as people began recording. The boy's smirk cracked, uncertainty flickering across his features like static, but Maya wasn't finished. Arabic unfurled from her lips, lyrical and strong, each syllable carrying the dignity Mrs. Al-Rashid had modeled while teaching her language between cleaning hospital rooms. Marhaba. Portuguese followed, taught by the Brazilian family who ran the corner store and treated Maya like their own daughter. Hola. Russian came next, harsh consonants softening in her mouth, a gift from the elderly woman who had survived wars and walked Maya home from the library on cold nights, teaching her phrases that tasted like black bread and determination. Privet. German emerged, precise and controlled. Lessons learned from the retired teacher at the community center who still believed education could save the world. Guten Tag. Japanese flowed like water, each sound carefully shaped, taught by the chef who had fled economic collapse and now worked in a mall food court, but took time to share his language with a curious teenager. Konnichiwa. By the 9th language, the boy's feet had slipped from the armrest. His face flushed crimson, a mottled red that spread from his neck to his hairline. He looked around desperately, seeking support, but met only expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Maya saved English for last. She let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, 2, 3, until the tension became almost unbearable. Then she spoke, each word landing with the weight of absolute certainty. "I speak these languages not because I need to prove anything to you. I speak them because knowledge doesn't care about your prejudice. Learning doesn't ask permission from people who think they own the world. Every word I know came from someone you probably dismiss without a second thought. Immigrants, refugees, the people who clean your schools and serve your food and drive your taxis. They taught me that language is power. And power doesn't belong to the person who mocks someone for the color of their skin. It belongs to anyone willing to learn, to listen, to grow." The cabin exploded into applause. It started with the businessman, who had set aside his laptop entirely and now clapped with fierce approval. The woman with the pearls joined in, tears streaming down her cheeks. Within seconds, nearly every passenger in first class was applauding, some standing, phones held high to capture the moment. The boy tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. His laugh came out as a strangled sound, dying before it could take root. He glanced at his phone, at the cameras pointed his way, and something in his face collapsed. All the arrogance drained away, leaving only a teenager who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "That young woman," the woman with the pearls said loudly, her voice shaking with emotion, "just reminded us what real class looks like, and it has nothing to do with ticket prices." A flight attendant appeared from the galley, her professional smile replaced by an expression of steel. She must have heard the commotion, or perhaps someone had alerted her. "Sir," she addressed the boy, her tone leaving no room for argument, "your behavior is completely unacceptable and violates our airline's code of conduct. Remove yourself from the aisle immediately, or security will be called to escort you from the aircraft." The boy's jaw worked soundlessly. His legs drew back as if pulled by invisible strings. He sank into his own seat, shoulders hunched, trying to make himself small. It didn't work. Everyone had seen him. Everyone knew what he had done. Diana's hand found Maya's shoulder, squeezing gently. Her mother's voice was barely a whisper, thick with emotion. "They always forget who we are, baby. They look at us and see what they want to see. But I never forget. And you just reminded everyone else." From somewhere overhead, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom with calm authority. "Good afternoon, passengers. Before we prepare for departure, I want to remind everyone that respect and dignity are not optional on this aircraft. They are requirements. We expect every person aboard to treat their fellow travelers with courtesy, regardless of who they are or where they're from. There will be no exceptions." The words settled over the cabin like snow, cold and final. The boy slumped further into his seat, eyes fixed on his lap. No one looked at him with sympathy. Several passengers nodded in approval of the captain's statement. Maya eased into her seat, the leather cool against her back. She didn't feel triumphant exactly. Triumph implied a game, a competition, and this had never been about winning. It had been about refusing to be erased, about standing in the space she had every right to occupy. Diana settled beside her, tears glinting in the corners of her eyes, though her expression remained controlled. "You didn't just answer that, boy," she murmured. "You answered for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. For everyone who's been made to feel lesser because of how they look or where they come from." Maya's throat tightened. "Languages are bridges," she said softly. "That's what Mr. Okonkwo always says. They don't care who builds them or who crosses them. They just connect people." Across the aisle, the businessman leaned over. He was middle-aged, salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. "Young lady," he said, voice carrying genuine admiration, "I've been flying first class for 20 years. That was the most remarkable thing I've ever witnessed at 30,000 feet or on the ground." Others murmured agreement. A woman several rows back called out, "You're going to do amazing things with your life, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different." The boy finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." The words came out thin and hollow, an apology offered too late and with too little conviction. No one acknowledged it. No one said it was okay, because it wasn't. The damage had been done, the ugly truth revealed, and sorry couldn't undo what everyone had witnessed. As the flight attendants prepared the cabin for departure, Maya pulled a worn paperback from her backpack, a collection of short stories in 3 languages, but she didn't open it immediately. Instead, she stared out the window at the tarmac, watching ground crew members direct the plane with their bright orange batons. She thought about the people who had given her the weapons to fight today's battle. Mrs. Chen, working night shifts to send money to family she might never see again. Mr. Okonkwo, whose degrees meant nothing in a country that only saw his accent and his skin. Senora Martinez, who had lost her husband and her country, but never lost her belief that education could transform lives. All the invisible people who kept the world running while others like that boy took credit for superiority they hadn't earned. Diana squeezed her hand. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. He had passed 3 years ago, cancer stealing him too quickly, but his last words to Maya had been about education, about using knowledge as both shield and sword. The plane began to taxi, engines rumbling to life. Through it all, Maya sat with her back straight, her breathing even. The boy remained hunched in his seat, phone dark, isolated in a cabin full of people who had witnessed his cruelty and found him wanting. When they finally lifted off, climbing into the darkening sky, Maya closed her eyes and felt the weight of 10 languages settling around her like a cloak. Each one a story, each one a survival, each one proof that power came not from where you were born or how much money your family had, but from what you chose to learn and how you chose to use it. Justice, she realized, didn't always require dramatic confrontation or legal proceedings. Sometimes it happened in the quiet moments after the shouting stopped, when the truth stood revealed and everyone had to decide which side of history they wanted to be on. The cabin settled into the rhythm of flight, but everything had changed. Passengers who might have remained silent in the face of injustice had seen what speaking up looked like. A boy who thought his privilege made him untouchable had learned otherwise. And a 15-year-old girl had proven that the most powerful weapon against hate wasn't violence or anger, but the simple, irrefutable demonstration of your own worth. As the plane climbed higher, carrying them all toward their destination, Maya finally opened her book. The words on the page blurred slightly, her eyes still stinging with unshed tears. But she read anyway, moving between languages with the ease of someone who knew that borders only existed for people who had never learned to cross them. Beside her, Diana watched her daughter with fierce pride, knowing that this moment would become part of the story they told, part of the legacy they built together. Not the story of a victim, but of a young woman who refused to shrink, who stood tall when the world tried to push her down, who spoke with the voices of everyone who had been silenced. The night sky embraced them, stars emerging one by one, and in that pressurized cabin suspended between earth and heaven, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was simply the quiet recognition that dignity could not be taken from someone who knew their own worth, and that worth had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. Maya turned the page, and somewhere below, the world continued spinning, changed in small ways by what had happened today, even if it didn't know it yet.